asking if I'm back, and I haven't really had an answer. But now, yeah, I'm thinking I'm back.
The action landscape has recently become defined by John Wick, with his influence felt across the industry. As much of big-budget action cinema gets absorbed into the superhero boom, and much of the martial arts world remains either in the Asian market or still on straight-to-DVD, John Wick stands out as a series as close to quality, pure action as you can still get at the box office. John Wick himself has become something of a pop culture figure, recently infiltrating video games, and the hotel he uses so much even has its own TV show on the rise. Not bad for where he started as the titular character of a relatively low-budget action flick that was considered somewhat of a risk by those who made it. So, what truly led to the rise of John Wick? Well, before we even get into that, we have to talk about what led to that first film. The key ingredients are still probably the writer Derek Kolstad and the experiences pre-Wick of the original film's directors Chad Stahelski and David Leitch, and of course, Reeves himself.
You working again?
No, just sorting some stuff out.
Derek Kolstad started with a spec script called Acolyte, which led to his writing films such as One in the Chamber and The Package, both starring Dolph Lundgren. Kolstad clearly knows action cinema. And he knows, if I'm being frank, how it is to work in low-budget DTV action cinema. His pre-Wick films aren't bad, but they are definitely of a certain formula. So, with his next spec script, Scorn, he included a sense of world building that felt quite unique to his usual fare. That script would become John Wick. Though the script would change quite a bit, with for example John originally being a man in his early 60s and Vigo being killed far earlier in the film, it struck me that Kolstad seemed to be purposely trying to do something different, which was carried across into that final film. He was taking that formula he knew well and applying a sense of fantasy to it that was daring and original. Something I also liked is that much of Wick's backstory is told via other characters. We see how effective John Wick is as a killer, so we do get a lot of that show don't tell style that is important to action cinema, but also it handles defining Wick and his legend through how others relate his past exploits.
Baba Yaga.
It builds a sense of Wick being a mythical figure. And that is not always too easy. Many films define their character's backstory in a similar way, but not always so successfully.
Let's not forget this president is a Medal of Honor winner. In Vietnam, he flew more helicopter rescue missions than any other man in my command. He knows how to fight.
The flashbacks too are sparingly used, and are of his wife. These flashbacks would actually far later become very important, acting in a way as the MacGuffin of the third film. But I'm getting ahead of myself. The script ended up in the hands of Keanu Reeves, who handed it to his friends Chad Stahelski and David Leitch, hoping that they would direct. With them, of course, having started the action design company 8711 as a way of supporting the industry they had worked in as part of the stunt world for so long, they knew they could bring something fresh to the somewhat stale contemporary action cinema. These guys could have done something more formulaic and it still would have probably turned out quite excellent, thanks simply to their quality of action. They didn't rest on that though and went for something with an edge of fantasy, something relatively unique. They didn't just want to make a great action movie, they wanted to make something above that. They wanted to show that they were more than just that. They could create a world. And if you look at some of the defining films of their pasts, with Stahelski standing in for the late Brandon Lee on The Crow, a film very much of a fantastical bent, and of course his time doubling Reeves in The Matrix, a series on which Leitch would join for the sequels, they knew how much that world building would matter to having their film stand out. I mean, these guys coordinated stunts for the Wachowskis on the criminally underseen Speed Race for a couple of years after being heavily involved with 300 stunt work. They had been immersed in action combined with world-building storytelling. I imagine that is a lot of what they saw in Scorn. And of course, perfect for that lead role was Keanu Reeves, a man who could be considered able to handle everything they need him to on screen. They wanted to create this figure of John Wick, the Baba Yaga, and they knew the only way to really do so would be to see their actor perform those story beats personally within the action. And thus, we got John Wick. It was quickly hailed as a fresh reinvention of the arguably tired American action film scene. It gave Keanu Reeves his fourth popular action hero and almost immediately rejuvenated his career. Not long after this, more and more films would borrow its use of colour and light. Older stars would try to recreate Reeves' success. Very much a sleeper hit, John Wick had still made one hell of an entrance. I have said often what makes John Wick stand out. The clear action with its excellent use of rhythm and geography, combined with a world that is simply a joy to learn more about. It didn't try to make Reeves look better than he is, keeping the fights hard-hitting and heavy, and the gunplay efficient and, where possible, realistic. It's always just on the right side of hyper-real, never fully allowing itself to fall into a comic book gravity-defying style. John Wick is also about something. It's about the past coming back to pull him back in.
You got out once. You dipped so much as a pinky back into this pond. You may well find something reaches out.
It was a world I wanted to stay in, learn more about, and luckily, it didn't take long for that to be made possible. David Leitch would decline to return for John Wick Chapter 2 and instead dive into other projects, such as Atomic Blonde. Attempting to build a similar world, this time of 80s paranoia, it wasn't quite as effective, though it certainly had some excellent action. Chad Stahelski would instead take on John Wick Chapter 2 alone, and really expanded its hero's world dramatically, showing us the international scale of the Continental. More of the rules and details, and of course characters that would reveal more of how things work. The plot is set into motion by, again, John's past coming back to haunt him now even more directly. They played more with style and colour here, and I was reminded of something Leitch said of the first film. They did not want to go too fantastical with the actual world, so instead the use of colour was to create that sense of fantasy.
You wanted me back. I'm back.
The lighting and production design is not just there to be different and cool, but to define a sense of tone and often narrative. I don't think I'd be reading too much into The Mirror Room, for example, as being John fighting reflections of himself, fighting off his past. It's certainly more than just an Enter the Dragon reference. The action here is of course increased in scale, but never too much. It is still about what Wick can do alone. It is fascinating to me that the end of the Russian saga is just by making peace, after admittedly a huge show of force.
Такой фраер хочет бить, нет предела.
Почему бы нет?
Peace is after all what Wick wants, and so for us to see how desperate these fights sometimes become gains a new dimension. Wick just wants to survive. This may look cool, but we know the man at the centre of it is part of a gauntlet he does not want to be in. This fantastical world that has been built up so much, we realise that's because all of it is against him. It's an antagonist in itself. That is why the world building is so brilliantly done. You even often feel as if Wick is being reminded to be that famous killer by tertiary characters, because he doesn't really want to be.
Do enjoy your party.
What Chapter 2 does so well is establish that Wick will never be safe, never free, unless he does the one thing he doesn't want to do anymore: kill everyone. Because of course, if you want peace,
Parabellum.
it is hard to not narratively leap to the third film since they happened so close together in time. The whole John Wick trilogy happens over a couple of weeks, which it is easy to forget. If anything, it's one of the series' only weaknesses.
Why do you wish to live? My wife, Helen.
to remember her.
Wick talks of fighting for a memory, which feels like it is getting a little long in the tooth now and he needs a little more to fight for, until you remember the time frame is incredibly reduced. So unless you watch all of the films closely together, you can lose some of that intensity. The third film, of course, introduced elements again unseen, from the Moroccan Continental and a character Wick fights alongside for the first time, to the Elder and the Adjudicator. The focus is expanded dramatically and the hyper-reality heightened into something truly fantastical.
We only use this room on special occasions.
With fighting animals, vanishing ninjas, and the most revealed about Wick's past yet. To say Chapter 3 is something of an escalation is an understatement. For me, I do think perhaps Chapter 3 is the weakest of the films, whilst also being the most technically impressive. What they pull off is at times nothing short of breathtaking, with the film especially proving that few creative teams seamlessly combine never better physical action design with incredible CGI work as well as those here. My issues, of which there are admittedly few, come with the lack of focus. As the title expanded, so too did the supposed importance of other characters, and the running time.
Tick-tock, Mr. Wick. Tick-tock.
It of course allows the film something of a Fury Road return to the point of origin.
We go back?
That brings in Winston and Sharon in a very exciting battle.
Sir, put your weapon down.
The problem is really just that the film has gone on for so long that though it doesn't quite have that Hobbs and Shaw feel of ending only to inexplicably carry on for another half an hour for no really needed narrative reason, it does extend things perhaps longer than they need to. The Adjudicator perhaps represents my issues with Chapter 3. There is maybe a pleasing contrast between them, the complex bureaucracy to John's single-minded determination, so it's not that they are particularly bad in any way, but more that it is not till the very end that John finds out of their existence. Zero ends up John's main opponent, and him being a fan is a cool, weird way to play a bad guy, but otherwise our lead has little connection to these characters.
Very well, gentlemen.
The Adjudicator works when in tandem with Zero, but more than anything they're Winston's antagonist, not John Wick's.
Mr. Wick is gone.
A true tragedy.
That said, if I'm being honest, I am personally otherwise happy with the third film, and I'm just looking at it somewhat objectively. The second is my favourite, as I've said before, as I loved how it expanded the world whilst retaining such a tight focus. It never developed into action above what Reeves could believably pull off, which I felt the third at times did, even if they give a narrative reasoning for it. And the second is simply the one I see myself returning to in the future, more than the others. There was a thematic development in the second, continuing a feeling that John was an inevitable angel of death that I saw less of in the third.
You incinerated the priest's temple. Burned it to the ground. Now he's free of the marker. What do you think he'll do?
The rise of John Wick is thanks to two things. A creative team that are absolutely the best in the business, and an audience starved of this sort of thing. Don't get me wrong, there is great action outside of the US, but let's be real. The latest Asian action flick is never going to have the impact in the West of a Keanu Reeves-led semi-blockbuster. Delivering something most Western audiences haven't seen before as part of a story that is simple to understand and follow, but rewards those wanting to look deeper into the world, has led to a trilogy of films that truly stand out in contemporary cinema.
That was a pretty good fight, huh?
So what about John Wick Chapter 4? Well, there isn't an entry in an action film series I want to see more. I fully believe in this team to create another action classic in the fourth film, as long as perhaps they bring back a bit more of that focus and narrative subtext. There is nothing quite like a John Wick film. I hope for many more, as long as they continue to do that character justice. Thanks for watching, please remember to like and subscribe, and if you want to hear more of my immediate ramblings on films, check me out on Twitter. Thank you.